We always talk about recalls as being a hook to drive customers back to the store that haven't been there in a long time. If you look at our data that's on our platform, we have a metric called days since last visit, DSLV, sure. And we bring customers back on average 635 days since last visit. And the biggest benefit we have is if we can do the timing right, you'll get a customer that's overdue on maintenance, overdue on a service interval. Maybe their contact information has changed. We make sure that we're bringing people in that not only haven't been there in a long time, but because it's a recall, we're exempt from TCPA. So I can text these customers even if they're not on a marketing list. And that's super valuable for the dealership.
You're listening to Retention Roadmap, the podcast designed to help you retain dealership customers and solve service department challenges, featuring insights, industry best practices, and real-life success stories from experts and peers. Now, here's your host, Bill Springer.
Welcome to Retention Roadmap, navigating service success for new car dealerships. I'm your host, Bill Springer, and today's podcast is sponsored by DriveSure. DriveSure helps new car dealerships remain the go-to provider for maintenance, tires, and repairs. For information on how DriveSure can help your dealership retain more customers for scheduled maintenance, tires, and unplanned repairs, go to drivesure.com/dealership solutions. Today, I'm excited to welcome Ryan Maher, the CEO and founder of BizzyCar, a platform that's revolutionizing how dealerships manage recalls and mobile service operations. Driven by his experience as a dealer, Ryan created BizzyCar to help dealerships improve customer retention and drive service revenue. In today's episode, we'll explore how BizzyCar is helping dealerships leverage recalls and mobile service to help build trust and enhance the customer experience. So let's get started. Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you on a cold January day, Bill.
Indeed it is. Let's just dive right in, Ryan. And you're a dealer yourself and experienced some pain point with recalls in your dealerships. And so can you explain how that experience and those pain points kind of helped you create BizzyCar?
Yeah. So about 5 years ago, my brother and I were sitting in our stores on a Saturday, as you do. We just ordered lunch for the sales team. And I got one of those classic OEM emails telling us that we had a Takata airbag problem in one of our stores. And this was 5 years ago. You remember all Takata was just the raging back then. And we were so sick and tired of hearing about it. And on a whim, we said, can we Google search or figure out a better way of solving these recalls? And there was nothing else out there. There was no tool to help us fix it. And so we sat around we'd ordered, I think, hot sandwiches for everybody. And we said, how can we fix this problem? And so we went about tackling it and seeing what we could do.
That's great. It does seem, from my perspective, Ryan, it seems like the way in which dealerships get information on recalls really seems to be fractured. Everybody seems to do it differently. Is that just by ignorance or is that true?
No, it's really a fragmented process. And I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head, Bill. Like, it is multiple disparate systems with multiple logins. It's very human driven. Mm-hmm. You're relying on asymmetric information from the car manufacturers. You're relying on DMS providers, service tools. Do I have the right part in stock? And then in our industry, unfortunately, we have a fair amount of turnover. And so the stars align, you get all these tools lined up, you've trained somebody on how to solve this problem for you, and they leave. Yeah. And it's the worst. And so my brother and I were like, goodness gracious, there's just got to be a better mousetrap.
And can you share with us kind of how BizzyCar created that mousetrap and what's your kind of secret sauce?
The founder story or origin story is always fun. So we took our Saturday sitting in the conference room and we literally went and Google searched used cars in our PMA, right? Our primary market area. And we said, can we just find some Nissans and some Volvos and some Fords? And can we just see if these cars with recalls are sitting on other lots? And as it turns out, the very first VIN number that we looked up, and I just went to Auto Trader, very first VIN number I went to had a recall. And it was crazy, right? It was sitting on a Subaru lot right across the street from my Nissan dealership. And I called the dealer and I said, hey, you've got a vehicle with a recall. Take me 2.4 hours to fix it. Can I come get it? And the general manager, who I knew pretty well, was like, no, you can't have it. I'll bring it to you. And I was like, my mind was blown because he wanted the recall fixed. He knew it didn't cost him anything. He didn't want to have to give that disclosure notice to the customer.
Sure.
So he brought it right over to me. And the funny story is there were actually 3. We found out later that day there were 3 cars on his lot that had recalls. And so he was just like, what do you want me to do? Start sending porters over? So that's how we got started. And we made $40,000 our first month. And then about 6 weeks later, COVID happened and the world was just shutting down. And we said, we got to figure out a way to stay in the business. So this went from like maybe an interesting idea on a Saturday afternoon to a full blown, we got to make this work or we're going to be laying off technicians during COVID. Yeah. And that's how it got started. And here we are 2,000 dealerships later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. We were just talking before we started recording about that. We were recording this just after the NADA show in New Orleans. And I had given a workshop on boosting your service retention. And after the workshop, one of the questions that I got from one of the folks in the audience was, how do recalls factor into customer retention? And I think, recalls, perhaps from the consumer's, the vehicle owner's perspective or the OEM's perspective, are obviously not good news. But from the dealership's perspective, it really is an opportunity, particularly around retention, isn't it? And wondering how would you have answered that question?
Yeah, so we always talk about recalls as being a hook to drive customers back to the store that haven't been there in a long time. If you look at our data that's on our platform, we have a metric called days since last visit, DSLV. Sure. Mm-hmm. And we bring customers back on average 635 days since last visit.
Wow.
That's nuts. In like our industry, that's nuts.
That's not only considered a lost customer, that's a dead customer for many respects.
Yeah, and the numbers actually go up even higher for luxury brands. So we have some luxury brands that the average is 1,000 days.
Wow.
So when you think about how recalls can reactivate a customer, you're not just bringing somebody in that has and we're talking about 70% gross margin. I mean, is it as good as main shop CP work? No. Is it a heck of a lot better than Express and it's a lot cheaper to get the customer? Absolutely.
Sure.
And the biggest benefit we have is if we can do the timing right, you'll get a customer that's overdue on maintenance, overdue on a service interval. Maybe their contact information has changed and you've been sending the wrong message to the wrong person at the wrong time. And what we do on the BizzyCar front is we make sure that we're bringing people in that not only haven't been there in a long time, but because it's a recall, we're exempt from TCPA. So I can text these customers even if they're not on a marketing list. And that's super valuable for the dealership.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I'm curious, Ryan, when you, as you say, use that recall as a hook to get that customer to come in who might not have been in for several years. I'm just curious if you have any metrics around subsequent visits from that customer. How well does getting that customer in for that recall impact the likelihood of them coming back for their next scheduled maintenance service, their next, when they need tires or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, so we get that question a lot from our OEM partners. We call it a reactivation rate, and that means one service visit in 12 months or car purchase every 36 months. Reactivation rate for us is over 64%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Wow.
And a lot of the reason why we are getting such strong numbers there is we tell the dealers, right? When these customers come in, you need to treat them the right way. So we were at NADA last week, New Orleans, kind of a disaster with the snowstorm, but we still had some good meetings. There's a guy that popped up his hand in a seminar. It's like, yeah, I use BizzyCar, but they only bring me 25 or 30 appointments a month. And, I kind of sat there and I was like, you totally missed the value prop here. Because if you're just looking for appointments, don't use our product. What you're getting with us is the lifetime value increase of bringing customers back into your store. We are bringing people into your store that have already voted with their feet.
Yeah.
So if you're going to be stepping over dollars here to pick up nickels, use some other tool. Use your BDC. But if you want to have a tool that reaches out and gets people in that either have never been there before or it's been a long time since they were there, look at the bigger picture. Look at the next $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 worth of service work that you can get from that big reactivation rate.
Help us understand, Ryan, if there's a dealer principal, general manager, service director listening, can you give us an example of kind of a before and after for a typical dealership that you engage with? What was it like before they started using BizzyCar? And then what was it like afterwards, both in terms of internal processes, perhaps, as well as obviously results?
Yeah, so I'll pick on one. We just did this for a publicly traded group that's got over 100 stores on our platform. Do you guys talk about missed recall opportunities? I'll be candid with you. As a dealer, I didn't know what this was until about 18 months ago. For the people listening, a missed recall opportunity is the way we define it. The way the OEMs define it is I bring my car in for an oil change. It has a recall. And I leave the store an hour later. I got the service work done, but I declined the recall. And we've worked with some stores where that missed opportunity rates 10, 20, 30, in some cases over 50%.
Wow.
Those are really high numbers. And the number one reason why somebody would decline recall work is time, right? Like,
sure,
we're telling you the car is dangerous. It's free, but you didn't manage my expectations properly. And this large publicly traded group had a missed opportunity rate. And I got to be a little careful here, but I'll say the low teens.
Okay.
By the time that, 90 days into their, on-ramp, they had a 50% reduction in missed opportunities. 50. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like in my service department, we're fighting for 2 and 3% gains.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
50%, that's really a big number. So
that's some serious traction. Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge that we've had with some of these dealer groups is like, it's so good that they want more of it. So, we're working through that, but that's what are we seeing on those results? Those are the types of results you're getting by focusing on recalls.
Yeah. And is that primarily through awareness, both awareness on the part of the service advisor and obviously through then to the customer, or something else?
Yeah, great question. The thing that I knew we had to do as a dealer when we brought a product to market, now I'm on the dirty vendor side, right? I am so much nicer to my vendors now than I was 5 years ago. Throwing them out of the store. Don't you know it's the end of the month? I was like, I use that excuse, right? But the product had to be automated. So BizzyCar requires zero training to anybody in the store. There's no login. There's no dashboard. You don't click any buttons. And the value for that is you're buying an outcome. And 3 or 4 years ago, that wasn't possible. AI has allowed us to make this a truly automated function. And so to your question about, is it the service advisor or the BDC manager? We have taken the 4 stakeholders that are typically involved in this: service advisor, BDC manager, parts manager. Everybody forgets about the parts manager. You can't do a recall if you don't have the part there, and then the service manager. So we've said, okay, all 4 of these people have to be simpatico. They got to be in sync, or you can just use our software. And the benefit of that is you bring customers in that have not been there in a long time, or they're maybe disgruntled, or they've never been there. And then before they show up, maybe they were scheduling an oil change or something. We're going to reach out to them and say, you got to recall Bill. Let's get out of the calendar.
Fantastic. Let's pivot to mobile service, Ryan, because I know BizzyCar is playing a big role in mobile service. And one of the things that we noticed in the surveys that we've done, in 2023, we did a survey of 1,400 active service customers of new car dealerships and asked them a series of questions, trying to understand why they come to the dealerships for service, why they defect, a bunch of other questions. And one of the changes that we saw from the previous survey was a point of defection was service appointment availability. So as dealerships' capacity got stretched within their service departments, customers were defecting because they couldn't get into the dealership in the time frame in which they wanted. And for listeners of our podcast who are consistent, and they've seen us talk to a number of experts with respect to mobile service, from Todd Rayburn at Ford to Jeremy Stevens at Bozard and folks from Kirby. Tell us a little bit about how BizzyCar got involved in mobile service, and how do you see that impacting shop capacity amongst other things for dealerships?
Yeah. So if you're a executive manager or dealer principal, you know that the only way to increase capacity is to add more service base. And if you're landlocked or you're thinking, I don't want to add $7 million of improvements to my building, or maybe you can't, great way to increase capacity is with mobile repair. I talk to a lot of dealers about mobile. I mean, we have over 500 mobile dealers on our platform. I mean, I think we are by far the largest mobile technology provider in the entire country. And we're adding a ton, we add over 100 dealers a month to our platform. So something's working, right? And what a lot of dealers struggle with is, how do I get started with mobile repair? So here's what I always, wearing my dealer hat here instead of my vendor hat. It's okay to start small, right? You don't have to have the $145,000 crazy UPS lookalike mobile van, right? That's got every piece of equipment on there. I have those. Those are great in my stores. When you're ready, step into that. But you can start small. You can start with a Nissan Rogue or a Hyundai Santa Fe or a Ford Escape. And it is so powerful when you reach out to a customer that has a recall and you, again, who maybe hasn't been there in 2 or 3 years, and say, hey, Bill, I'm reaching out on your 2019 Honda CRV and want to let you know you got a recall and you never have to leave your house. I won't valet your car. I can come to your driveway and repair it there. And you're like, well, while you're here, can you get me an oil change?
Mm-hmm.
So it's so good. It's such an easy way to increase capacity. And from a recruiting and a staffing perspective, such a good way to add headcount. I can't tell you the amount of times I talk to GMs and DPs about, we got a technician shortage. Is there a shortage of skilled labor in the United States? Sure. But we also don't pay them, right? So every time I talk to a dealer, 99% it's a pay plan problem. But let's just ignore that for a second. Great way to bring people into the trades is to give them a different way of looking out the window during the day.
Yep.
I'm not coming into your shop. It's 102 degrees in St. Louis in August. And I'll pass. I'd rather be on the road and master of my own domain. And so not only are you getting capacity from a bay perspective, a service bay perspective, but you're picking up that technician as well. So you got to look at it holistically, and mobile is giving us all of that.
Yeah. And really providing a broader recruitment base as well, and in trying to recruit folks like HVAC folks, who they have to have some customer service skills. They have to have technical skills. You typically want to be, as you said, outside the four walls. And, so I think it does increase the base from which you can recruit from.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking to a guy that owns an HVAC company as well. So, and HVAC and auto are oddly extremely similar. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a $15,000, $20,000 purchase price. You might be doing it every couple of years. You service it twice a year. It's nearly identical. There's a finance option, right? There's a lot there. And so we learned a long time ago, we've taken some best practices. My HVAC techs know how to do a menu presentation and explain to a customer, show them the filter. Don't tell them, show them. Right. And it's just part of the process and very easy to apply some of those skills. But we also train from within. We'll bring people in that would not otherwise do it. And it's a great way to increase the trade.
Moving on to the future. So when you look in your crystal ball, Ryan, you recently announced a $15 million growth round for your company. What changes or innovation should we expect to see from BizzyCar in the coming months or years?
We have 3 products that are kind of publicly out in the space as of NADA. Last week, we are doing a lot more. We have a 4th product that's out there that's allowing us to focus beyond recalls. So we're expanding to a lot of other spaces. And AI is definitely part of that solution. But the key thing for us is we build products that solve pain. I believe in the power of pain. As a startup CEO, you can't just force, how many vendors I have coming to my stores on a daily basis. I'm a lot nicer to them now. They're everywhere. And I don't need you. The old adage with the vendors was, you just got to sell one more car a month and this pays for it. It's like, well, I'm not here to just line your pockets, right?
Yeah.
I need products that either help me sell more cars or help me fix pain points. And so everything we build in the BizzyCar world is identifying really big pain. And we're seeing right now, I was just looking at Glenn Mercer's article from in auto news yesterday that dealer profitability is back down to 2 to 2.5% net sales from a high of 6 to 7%. So we're looking really closely at our expense line. And if the product is complicated, if it requires just tremendous amount of training, or I'm like fighting the system, we're not keeping it.
Yep.
And so what's coming down the pike, every product that we build here will have AI enabled and as part of it, and it will be super easy. And if you can't remember how to do something, the product will help you. And that's, I think, what you're going to have the future in auto tech.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's great. So as we wrap up here, Ryan, one of the things that maybe is not so well known about you is that you were a former officer in the United States Marine Corps.
That's right.
As an officer in the Marine Corps, I'm curious as to how that experience has informed and influenced your approach, particularly as you are running an organization like BizzyCar.
Yeah, so being a Marine officer is a lot like being a startup CEO. The Marine Corps, we're very combat oriented, and I think it's safe to say we get the fewest amount of resources out of the major service branches. So we learn to do more with less, and it's similar to the auto industry. It's definitely the way that it works in startup world, right? You got to figure stuff out every day, and one of the biggest lessons I always talk about is there's this famous Air Force officer named Lieutenant Colonel John Boyd who came up with this concept called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. If you're a fighter pilot, he taught this to all these Marine fighter pilots in Vietnam. And the idea here is if you're two fighter jets and your close rate, one's going 500 miles an hour and one's going 500 miles an hour, that's 1,000 mile an hour close rate. So you have to learn how to make decisions quickly. And, on the observe side, you think, well, where am I? What's changed? You orient to that change. You have to make a decision. And there's a lot of dealers that have kind of been lulled into, we can just ride it out. Things will go back to normal. I keep hearing this, like, we got to return to normal. It's like, hey man, there's a new normal. You got to get used to that. Right. And then the final part of the saying is act. You have to make a decision and act on it. Whoever can work through their loop the fastest wins. And that lesson applied to a startup is so important because there's a lot of stuff that kills us, right? Like we can run out of money. We can have customers that hate us. And so we have to look at the competition. We have to look at the customer. We have to look at the car manufacturer. And you just keep running through that loop. And he who has the fastest loop wins.
That's fantastic. I love that. I mean, that's great advice for whether you're running a startup or just trying to get through the day.
If you're in the AI space, I mean, or you're watching what's going on in politics, I mean, there's a lot of loops getting busted right now, and it's going to freak some people out, and it's a whole new world out there.
It sure is. Well, thanks very much, Ryan. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
You can find us at BizzyCar.com. That's BIZZY car.com. You can always shoot us an email at hello@BizzyCar.com.
Okay. Super. We appreciate that. We'll make sure we include that in the show notes as well.
Cool.
Brian, thanks very much for being on the podcast today. We really appreciate it.
You bet. Thrilled to be here. Look forward to coming back.
Super. You've been listening to Retention Roadmap, Navigating Service Success for New Car Dealerships. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.